I think we're live, so we'll start the webinar. Welcome to everyone from wherever you are in the world today. Some of our presenters are in Europe and in Korea, so we're spanning a couple of time zones, and there may be others of you elsewhere in the globe. So thank you very much for attending, and thanks also to the BS Group for organizing this webinar. On the discussion topic, the perennial discussion topic, what will fuel the ships of tomorrow? So we have a great panel representing with Aisha on the fleet operator side, with Dejin on the commodity fuel supply side, and Naomi from the ports, who bring everything together, where it all happens. So I will start with a few words about myself. My name is Steve Esau. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for SEA-LNG. SEA-LNG is a global industry organization focused on improving the understanding of the commercial and environmental benefits of the methane pathway for shipping. It starts, obviously, as the name suggests, with fossil LNG progressing via biomethane in the medium term to the adoption of methane in line with the industry's net zero ambitions for 2050. In terms of the structure for the webinar, I will introduce each speaker, who will then make a short presentation. And each presentation will then be followed by a short 5-minute Q&A. Once all speakers have presented, we'll move into a broader panel discussion based on the questions, and this is what I'd like to emphasize, that you, the webinar participants, submit through the Q&A dialogue. So the direction of the panel is really, really driven by your appetite to ask questions. Well, I hope all that's clear. I'll just start with a few introductory words. I mean, now clearly the adoption of alternative marine fuels is being driven by regulation. Initially, regulation was focused on local emissions and primarily the emission control areas that have been introduced over the past 20 years to address emissions of SOx, NOx, and lastly, particulate matter. Regional emissions controls became global with the introduction of the IMO sulfur cap back in 2020. And these regulations primarily have driven the uptake of cleaner, if you like, traditional oil-based fuels and LNG. So better fossil fuels. Now, the focus has shifted to decarbonization, which is moving the attention to completely new fuels as solutions. You can only do so much with energy efficiency. And these new fuels include the green forms of methanol, ammonia, methane, and hydrogen. And some are even talking about onboard carbon capture as well. So there are a plethora of regulations emerging in relation to decarbonization. Europe, in many ways, has been in the vanguard with the inclusion of shipping in EU ETS, the introduction of fuel maritime in last year, and other regulations such as mandates for onshore power supply in ports. The IMO has clearly a major focus on decarbonization and introduced its first operational measure in the form of CII in 2023. In line with its greenhouse gas strategy, and is now working on the adoption of the net zero framework, where be that in its current form or in some sort of revised form, and I'm sure we'll have a little bit of discussion around that. Other jurisdictions have introduced or are also considering introducing instruments like carbon levies or some form of emission pricing. So we're seeing a range of regulations emerging. And all this makes for a really complex and evolving patchwork of decarbonization regulations with different scopes and different mechanisms. And this complexity and uncertainty makes for a very challenging investment environment for fleet operators, for the fuel suppliers, and for the ports in the middle of this. I think we really want to stress that, and we should not forget that, yes, the investment in the alternative fuel vessels is key, but 75% of the investment to decarbonize shipping will need to take place onshore in developing the fuel supply chains and the associated infrastructure. So with those introductory comments, I'd now like to turn it over to our panel, beginning with Aisha. And Aisha works at the intersection of engineering, technology evaluation, and business strategy at AP Moller Maersk to accelerate the transition towards a net zero future through technology road mapping, scouting for emissions reduction opportunities, and translating technical feasibility into business impact. She has a background in academic research in chemical engineering, and for the past 3 years, she has been working as a future fuels manager for Maersk. So Aisha, over to you.
Thank you, Steve, for the kind introduction. Very happy to be here, and I would like to also thank organizers for the invitation and for the chance to share my insights and expertise. And I will be very glad to answer to all of your questions related to future fuels. I can talk about fuels day and nights, from production pathways to the fuel properties. But also like sometimes from let's say workshops and like during the workshops and webinars, I always repeat that the future is gonna be multi-fuel future. There will be no single fuel that can comply with all decarbonization of the maritime sector. And I have seen many like reports, analysis work, different attempts to forecast what will be the future fuel mix and exact share of the certain fuels. And especially, I think it's highly uncertain, and I think it's a little bit of guessing game, especially for 2050. But based on the current regulatory frameworks and what's going on in the market, I think we can also predict more or less what will be the future fuel mix by 2030. And for me, the most realistic way is just to look at the order book. And here I'm showing one slide, but I think it gives also a lot of information on the fuel types and mix that it's kind of snapshot of different commitment from different ship owners. And based on the report made by DNV, the global fleet actually consists of around more than 100,000 vessels, and based on the order book, which was reported in 2024, only 7.4% is basically represents dual vessels. So it's based on LNG or liquefied biomethane, methanol type of engines. And then out of this 7% of the new order book, it's basically 80% of this alternative fuel is basically LNG dual fueled. And that's not surprising because of before the current geopolitical situation, LNG actually, it was the fuel with the lowest compliance in terms of fuel EU maritime, and also like it can be used for the liquefied biomethane or so-called mass balance bio-LNG as well. And there's quite important fact that 90% of the fleet is still based on the conventional fuels. And then currently the main fuel that we use as a renewable fuel in the maritime sector is basically based on lipid type of products such as FAME, biodiesel, ukome, and we can also see some niche type of fuels like CNSL, cash natural liquids, also waste tire pyrolysis oil, and then different synthetic fuels coming from plastics. And then there are also very, very early stage work is going on biomass-derived fuels. And these all biofuels should be compatible with conventional fuels. And we still need like quite a huge amount of these new types of biofuels for the decarbonization of the existing fleet. Yeah, I will be happy here to answer all the questions related to methanol, bio, e-methanol, or ammonia. And we know that there is no perfect fuel. Every type of fuel has own cons and pros. For example, if we talk about ammonia, it doesn't contain any carbon, so it's considered as more scalable if there is like enough renewable electricity. However, it's quite toxic, and there are like a lot of work is going on its safety measurements. While when it comes to methanol, both like e or biomethanol or even hybrid methanol, a lot of discussions going on availability of CO2 point sources, but still it's not that toxic, and it's basically, let's say, more soluble with water in case of the spill and so on. And when it comes to biomethane, we know that it's basically currently the only fuel that can deliver negative emissions through avoided emissions, but it also a highly versatile molecule that can be used in other sectors. So we can see that for these fuels, we also have high competition from other sectors. So it's all about based on the commercial voyages of certain ship operators, and it's also based on the local business case, what will be the fuel used in the certain vessels. That was my short introduction to the fuels. If there are some questions, I will be happy to answer.
Thanks, Aisha. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we would like to see your questions for Aisha and for the other panelists. So don't be shy. Please let's see what's coming through. Oop, there was momentarily a question and it disappeared. Maybe I'll start the ball rolling. So Aisha, obviously Maersk is a very large fleet operator, and what is the approach the company is taking to its fuel renewal? How does it think about this in terms of the alternative fuel choices?
Yes, Maersk is. I work in energy transition, and we have like different teams: sustainability, market analytics team, and also future fuels capabilities. We basically. And I think what is right now happening is very complex landscape, and we always, when we choose the right type of the fuel, we always look into this fuel from the holistic point of view. So it's basically sustainability assessment, is the technical assessment, how the technology is mature, and also it's like the compliance with different regulations, because we have many regulations: IMO, Fuel EU Maritime, ETS, CI, and all this bunch of regulations. And of course, it's quite complex. But also, when you look for the fuel, the main criteria, of course, it should be sustainable, it should be scalable, and when people say scalable, it can be also, people can mean different things, but when I say scalable, it's affordable for the maritime sector, and it should be also the most important thing, that also geographically it should be available at the when your vessel goes like from one point to another, so the bunkering infrastructure should be nearby. So it's several of criteria for the fuels, and also compliance with different regulations. And holistic approach. And I think that's the reality of Maersk, and also I think it should be also in other like companies. I believe everyone considers from the holistic point of view.
Great, thank you very much. And we have a few questions here. Maybe I'll just start with the first question I see. A question here: Does the source of a biofuel change their efficiency? So I guess it's the quality, the spec, and how it's produced.
So I'm not sure if it's efficiency on board or is it efficiency of the process. Yes, it affects a lot. For example, we have ISO 8217, or even for biofuel we have AN, also certain certifications, and then it's set for, let's say, fossil fuels. But once you change one parameter, it can affect on your system, and then different fuels have different heating values, different calorific value, different composition, which affect also on the emissions. And also, this is what the efficiency of the vessel operations, right? It definitely affects, because the consumption can vary, the performance can vary. But if we talk about also process efficiency, it depends which process you are using. If it's like gasification from the wood, it's the same feedstock, and you will produce methanol, or you are using pyrolysis process to produce drop-in fuels. Again, efficiency of the process vary a lot. Definitely, dependent on the fuel type, efficiency will vary as well.
Thanks, Aisha. And then obviously biofuels are, I guess, one of the immediate steps that shipping is taking towards decarbonization. So I think it's interesting to see the complexities associated with what you think is or potentially is a simple drop-in approach, if you might naively assume. I'll have one more question for you, and then we'll move on to Dae-Jin. What is the average age of the global fleet? I suspect this relates to what the renewal picture looks like. And is there a realistic prospect, do you think, of hydrogen becoming more widely used as a marine fuel?
The average age of the vessel is about 23-25 years, and of course the higher capacity, TU capacity, probably you will prolong the life of the vessel, because it's for the ship owners or operators, it's a investment. For the hydrogen, it's for the hydrogen to be used as fuel, you need to compress, you need to transportation. Its transportation is quite expensive, and a lot of work I know that being done on this usage of hydrogen, or maybe the fuel cells. But I think instead of using hydrogen, probably I would say the direct electrification using batteries probably will be the more efficient, because you don't have any energy losses during the hydrogen production because of simple thermodynamics, right? You lose some of the energy. So I believe that electrification or using batteries will be more efficient than using hydrogen, due to the cost related to handling, transportation, compressing of the hydrogen for the short distances, of course.
Yeah. Thanks, Aisha. Well, thanks for that. I'm sure we will hear more from you a little later, but for the moment, I would like now to bring in Dae-Jin. And Dae-Jin is a top-ranked expert in the global shipping and commodities industry. His insights and interviews are featured on BBC World News Live and CNBC Live. So some very credible outlets there, Dae-Jin. He began his career in dry bulkering chartering, and spent several years at Hanjin Shipping, where he worked as business strategy manager and FFA trader. Before joining 30Stream, his current employer, he was director of shipping research at S&P Global Energy, and where he led the firm's core freight analytics and research capabilities. So very interested to hear from Daijin. I'm very interested to hear, I'm shoehorning your perspective into a sort of one of the commodities and fuel supply chain, but I'm sure you can speak much more broadly than that. So Daijin, over to you, and let's see your presentation. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks, Steve, for the introduction. Looks quite interesting to hear from somebody else. Anyway, so today, actually, I'm based in Dubai, but now I'm in Seoul. Obviously, you know the reason behind. So basically, all the conversation I had over the last 2 weeks, obviously, this is a very important topic of future pure. But basically, I will more giving some idea from, how can I say, practical commodity charterers perspective. And then basically our company is shipping fertilizer, which is also, how can I say, alternative pure. But before starting, I just want to give you some context behind this topic, and then what's going on in just 3 slides explaining what is conventional pure looks like now because of this conflict, so that we can discuss on the holistic view of the current situation into the future perspective as well. So I will briefly share my screen in a moment. Can you confirm you can see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes, I believe many of how can join event attendee know what's going on in Red Sea and Arabian Gulf, and then because we need some perspective about conventional pure as well as LNG, LPG, and also bulk carrier and container and vehicle carrier, and everything together is now having some major issue. And then just to give you context, we all know there are talking about 20% of global oil and energy is passing straight through Hormuz, which is now de facto, as you know, it's blocked. And then I based in Dubai, and many of people are concerning about the situation. But problem is now we talking about future pure. We normally talk about future pure as kind of sustainability perspective, but maybe because of this conflict coming in over the last few years, maybe we may need to think about now energy security issue as well, because conventional energy is very much, how can I say, exposed to many conflict or geopolitical issue. But as you know, we are talking about LNG, LPG, and the oil passing through straight to Hormuz, maybe 20 to 30% impact means global energy is basically jump up or surge up to, how can I say, certain area. And then when you see current situation now, you can see that obviously we know now almost near to zero transit, but there are a few Chinese ship and then Iranian ship is passing by. But on the other hand, you see that on the left-hand side, still so many ships cannot moving away. Means whenever you need some energy, you now facing massive energy security issue. And then we don't know what is the timeline about this opening up again. But currently, over the last 2 weeks, we counted the vessel in the Arabian Gulf region is now accumulating, and almost 7 to 10% of global crude oil fleet is inside this Hormuz area, and also 2 to 3% of conventional dry bulk or container or those vessels also still inside Strait of Hormuz. And then because of that, obviously, you know, now we will hear from Rotterdam port, Naomi will speak about it, but now we are seeing that massive jump in bunker fuel, conventional bunker fuel price, as you know, and then also tanker freight rate as well. So which is basically very important for us to understand that when it happens, if you are dual fuel vessel, or if you are LNG bunker fuel vessel, or maybe you have some diversified pure, how can I say, portfolio, maybe this could be a little bit different. But at this point, what I want to say is that I think Aisha a little bit earlier talked about scalability of, how can I say, new bunker pure, how can I say, investment is still not there. And then I'm from fertilizer industry, which is basically whenever we talk about ammonia, it's basically fertilizer. And then we heard from many new startup about, how can I say, green ammonia, but many new startup, many new stage of the, how can I say, development, still very much less scalable project. very much many projects, but we didn't see many kind of incentive or many motivation, because it's not really good for money. It's more driven by regulation. But at this point, we will discuss in the next few minutes about, is it really, how can I say, it's just sustainable because zero carbon emission. But at this point, maybe we also think about the way that maybe energy security could be also the one agenda when we talk about future fuel. So I stop here and then come back to our conversation. But at this point, whenever we discuss in the next few minutes, I think we can add some perspective of not just one maritime fuel as a zero carbon, but maybe energy security, as well as holistic view of another industry like fertilizer industry or automotive or maybe aviation industry. When we combine all together, maybe we have a better solution, or maybe better discussion. That's all I prepared.
Thanks, Daijin. I think that brings a very interesting perspective into the debate. So clearly, often, when we talk about alternative fuels, we're always talking about the decarbonization driver, but there are obviously other aspects to consider, and other potential drivers. So I see some of the earlier questions are perhaps a little more related to Aisha's presentation. I'm just looking to see if there are any questions that echo Daijin's presentation.
Yes, if I could take a final one recently from George. So when we say green ammonia, yes, especially that is important, because whenever I went to fertilizer, conversation, as well as fertilizer industry event, they all talk about green ammonia as a sustainable fertilizer, actually. So, but we are talking about here green ammonia as sustainable maritime fuel. But as you know, many times biofuel as well, something common ground for many industry, like biofuel is very common for car fuel, as well as aviation fuel, as sustainable aviation fuel as well. Basically, maritime need to actually compete for that portion. And then many times when we talk about green ammonia, basically we see a lot of green ammonia initiative in China and also many areas in Europe. But basically all those section is not really developed for actually maritime. It's mostly developed for fertilizer industry. So that's something important to understand. When you look into holistic view, at this point, yes, there are many projects is developing that side, but still we didn't heard scalable project, because it's still not yet viable, for commercially viable. And then even we heard blue ammonia, which is you already have an ammonia facility and you just put the carbon capture system to make a blue ammonia. Still, even blue ammonia does not really make sense for fertilizer industry, because you are still using just normal gray ammonia. It's still money making. Why you want to make a blue ammonia? So at this point in fertilizer industry, does not really moving for that, even though there are so many new startups to the green ammonia project, but we didn't see yet in the scalable project. I think that is something why we are seeing more come back to LNG alternative fuel, and then which is already there, already infrastructure there. I think Naomi will adding some perspective on that one as well. But at this point, for fertilizer industry perspective, green ammonia is actually, even for fertilizer perspective, is still not scalable. So that's something you may consider it.
No, Daijin, thanks very much for that reflection. And I think one of the things that occurs to me is often when we talk about fuels, sometimes we talk about the fact that there's going to be maritime is competing for scarce resources, but at the same time, when we're looking at the development of fuel supply chains, we're sort of told that maritime in itself maybe not a big enough customer to stimulate the investment that's needed. So it's that sort of competition versus synergies. And I think one of the things, it'd be interesting to hear your views on this, is one of the stimulus to ammonia potentially, or greener forms of ammonia, probably most likely blue initially, is the appetite for example, the Japanese power utilities to use ammonia
Exactly.
in decarbonization. So there you have an anchor load for a commodity which shipping may be able to also, there may be synergies for shipping.
Yeah, but Steve, you may heard that from even in Korea and Japan, they canceled many of ammonia project recently.
Oh.
So yeah, and then because the government have a plan something, and then when the government change it, then they just seeing that they want to have a better view of kind of zero emission or zero carbon emission, then they come into the idea that it's not really there. It's not really, how could say, commercially viable yet. So somehow, because of that, there are many vessels. CO2 carrier is something they cannot carry CO2 anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, what we are seeing is that because we are in the, how could say, fertilizer industry, many LPG vessel is basically ammonia carrier vessel, obviously, and then let's say about 10% of LPG vessel is ammonia carrier vessel. But when you say there are no green ammonia in the future, maybe that vessel may not have all the options or maybe efficient to moving it, because just the normal LPG vessel is more efficient than just ammonia capable. So it means basically whenever you do some projection of something, how can I say, into sustainable, if you are seeing many changeable things, like we hear the IMO try to do carbon levy, they just ditch it just last minute, and then there are a little pace, right, on your massive investment, and then that is what is happening now. So many, can say, some kind of consensus in fertilizer industry now is looks like 3 to 5 years delayed compared to 2 to 3 years ago, or maybe what's going on in geopolitical issue is basically delaying all the pathway to the decarbonization. And then I see some question that what is your view for 2030 and 2040 green ammonia or green methanol portion of energy in maritime? I see all the projection is delayed to 3 to 5 years over last few publication. So when you stick to 2 years ago and they say 10% reaching 2030, I never seen 2030 anymore. And then maybe 20% reaching 2040. And because of, if you do not do that with a zero carbon emission, you cannot meet the target. So it's not kind of project-wise forecast. It's more goal. When you see the set of goal, to reach that goal, you need to that scalable kind of energy set. But it does not work. At this point, it's not incentive, motivation, does not work for many project side. So that's why at this point, what we are seeing in a major initiative is more aviation side. They already do a lot of job. And then we are seeing automotive also delayed, as you know, German is also Europe is now delayed as well. And then also we are seeing maritime sector, there are many projects also a little bit delayed. So maybe at this point, when you see any, how to say, new publication, you should expecting some delay in kind of outlook. Maybe we can discuss in the next few, how to say, panel discussion.
Thanks, Daijin. And again, you make a very important point around, we need to see this in the broader context of the development of these new fuels. So now I'd like to move on to Naomi from the port of Rotterdam. So Naomi, while you get your slides sorted out, I will introduce you. Naomi is passionate about shipping and sustainability, and combines this in her role as program manager sustainable shipping at the port of Rotterdam. She has an MSc in marine engineering and has worked on various international partnerships in previous roles in the shipbuilding industry, as well as a detour into the clean cooking sector, which I didn't know about. Now, back in the maritime industry, she leverages this experience for the bunkering of alternative fuels in the Green Corridor Rotterdam-Singapore, which has been set up by the ports of Rotterdam and Singapore, and in various other projects across the value chain to accelerate the decarbonization of transport. So Naomi, over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Steve, for the great introduction. And also thanks, Aisha and Daijin, for really interesting insights already. We only got to share a few slides, so I really had to focus on my storyline on one thing. So I thought, let me let me share mainly from the port perspective, right? But I think, as Steve already put in the introduction, ports are the places where the vessels meet their fuel in form of bunkering. So for us as a port, besides being able to facilitate safe bunkering, of course, the development of the entire supply chain is super relevant, and that's what we also really try to facilitate from our perspective. But I wanted to focus mainly on bunkering and on how we where we stand with regard to the possibility of bunkering different fuels. As Aisha mainly also said, is that there is no single fuel that we can say, okay, this is the one, right? Even though the title sort of leads of this webinar sort of leads to us answering that question. We believe in Rotterdam that we need to facilitate a multi-fuel future. Because different fuels are relevant when you have different timelines, different vessel types, operate in different geographies, etc. This slide, very briefly, to introduce the Port of Rotterdam. Port of Rotterdam is the largest port in Europe and also the second largest bunker hub globally, meaning that it's the second hub where vessels have fuel intake. Very humble second after Singapore, which is by far the largest bunker hub in the world. But what I think is very important, and what chimes in with Dijan's position and the things he put forward, is that Rotterdam is also a huge energy hub. So Rotterdam is a very diverse port with a large chemical cluster and a large energy cluster, and 13% of total EU energy consumption passes through the port of Rotterdam. And that's something that is beneficial when we look at the transition. Of course, we can talk about competition, but we also really see synergies there, because already in Rotterdam there is storage for different molecules like methanol and ammonia, and also there is a large LNG terminal. So that enables us to sort of quickly move to facilitating that for the maritime sector as well. I think those are the two key things I wanted to highlight in this slide. So then, looking at bunkering and looking at the role of the port. Port of Rotterdam is a landlord port. So what we mainly do is we ensure safe handling of vessels on the water, so safety on the water. And secondly, we lease out land to companies that then build their facilities, either terminals or factories on that land. From the bunkering perspective, we have one key role, and that is that we as Port Authority are the competent authority to ensure that the guidelines for safe bunkering of fuels are in place. And where some years ago that was mainly fuel oil, at some point LNG came to be one of the fuels that we facilitate in Rotterdam, and now we're actually looking at a multitude of fuels. So we really see a quick ramp up of the fuels we need to facilitate and the guidelines we have in place. Now, if you've already been looking at this slide, then you see that there are 9 levels positioned on this slide. This is called the port readiness level framework, and it is used by many different ports across the globe. And it actually sort of identifies 3 different phases. At first, you have the research phase, where you will consider whether a fuel is relevant for your specific port and whether you need to make an effort to actually develop the safety frameworks for those fuels. As Aisha already said, different fuels have different characteristics that you need to be aware of when handling and using these fuels. And then the last phase is the deployment phase. So that is when actual bunkering will take place on commercial basis in the port. And as said, we are a landlord port, so many stakeholders are involved in that. The terminals, the fuel suppliers, the ship owner operators, but also that intermediate infrastructure, the bunker barge, because all bunkering in Rotterdam is done on a ship-to-ship basis. So if we very briefly touch on which fuels we then already can facilitate in Rotterdam, then I'm going from level 9 and then moving downward again. Methane, methanol, and bioblended fuel oil are already mature in Rotterdam, so those can be facilitated. There are bunker barges that can bunker these fuels. And maybe to be slightly more positive than Dijan, already 7% of the bunkers in Rotterdam are a bioblend, which means that this is either bioblended fuel oil or biomethane or biomethanol. So things are moving slowly to adopt sustainable fuels, and of course the fact that Rotterdam is located in Europe, where there is active legislation, both the EU ETS as well as Fuel EU Maritime, is important in that regard. And also there are supplier mandates from the Renewable Energy Directive, which play a role here. Then if we look at level 7, we see ammonia positioned there. So last year, an ammonia bunkering pilot was conducted in Rotterdam, and that was really meant to test the safety framework. So while we did that test, we could test our approach, and we said, okay, we know how what principles and what safeguards we need to require as a port authority for ammonia bunkering to be done safely, and also in which locations in the port ammonia can be bunkered safely due to the safety contours. So from actually this year on moving forward, bunkering of ammonia can be done with intermediate infrastructure on a project basis, which means that you specifically need to come to us with your project, and we will then together ensure that all the safeguards are in place. But there are no dedicated ammonia bunker barges yet, so you will have to use, for example, an LPG tanker that is capable of handling ammonia, or a mid-size ammonia carrier for that. So that is slightly more challenging than the other fuels that I mentioned. That's why in level 7. Liquid hydrogen, shortly touched on earlier, is still in level 5. So we are still working to establish a safety framework. And as soon as there is commercial interest, then we will do a liquid hydrogen bunkering pilot. But also there, of course, you need to have the facilities in place. And actually, this picture is a picture of the first biomethanol bunkering in Rotterdam, which was done by Maersk in 2023. That's a nice connection right there. Actually, I already shared what you see here in the different levels. So I think the development and deployment phase are very relevant for us as a port authority. And our goal is really to ensure that the availability of bunkering guidelines, so the safety framework from really where we are the competent authority, is in place when the market wants to move. So also for liquid hydrogen, we are working very closely with parties that are looking at adopting this fuel on their vessels. So yeah, I think that's reflecting from the core role, and then of course in collaboration also, for example, with Steve, we always try to support the ecosystem further, because we feel that we have a responsibility as large bunker hub to ensure that we can move this forward together. I will stop sharing. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Naomi. And that was a very helpful insight. Now, this port readiness framework, I think, is very, very, very powerful. So I know Rotterdam's been intimately involved in developing that. Any questions for Naomi before we move on to the more general discussion? And Naomi, equally do feel free to. Oh, here we go. Question for Naomi from Carlos Guerrero. Can you also describe the developments in terms of onshore power? Can you see it?
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah. So, Carlos, your question is on the development of onshore power supply in Rotterdam, and yeah, I can speak to that a bit. So, I think what is really key in the development of onshore power supply, there are certain parties, mainly on the predictable trades, so that have already had shore power installations since for more than 10 years. So those are the Ro-Ro ferries to the UK, but those are the smaller size installations. Then I think what is really key for the further rollout of shore power is that also there the EU has the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, which actually requires terminals to be able to facilitate shore power, and Fuel EU Maritime requires vessels to adopt shore power in the categories of cruise, container, and Ro-Ro as well, above a certain size, to use shore power by 2030. So all major container terminals have commitments in Rotterdam to facilitate shore power, and will have that ready, aiming to be online by 2028, but 2030 latest, because that's when there is an obligation. So that's very helpful. I think in that regard, what is really key about shore power is that, and Aisha already said, electrifying is the most efficient way if you can use the electron directly. So we really believe it is important. But where it seems to be the low-hanging fruit, also their standards needed to be set, right? So what plug do we use? What voltage do we use, etc. So for these segments that are obligated, this has been done. But we do see that for other segments, there is still work to do. So that's something we are heavily working on as well. And we actually have a separate shore power team that looks at this. Also, our cruise terminal went online last year, so they have a 10 megawatt connection for the cruise vessels, which are actually right next to this office. And I was speaking to someone from the municipality yesterday, and she said that the response has been very positive from the community, because shore power makes a big difference when you're close to a city on particulate matter, on noise, etc. So besides the climate benefit, there's also a very big local benefit. So yeah, definitely shore power is being developed. There are some segments for which this is still less mature. So mainly, yeah, these obligated sectors, and inland shipping, by the way, is also obligated in many areas in the port to use shore power, because Rotterdam also has a lot of inland shipping activity, which is not common in each and every port, but here definitely is a big thing. So I hope that answered your question.
Thanks, Naomi. And I see you've got quite a few questions. I don't know if you would like to pick one.
Yeah, so I think the safety measures is, I can be very brief. The port is 42 kilometers long and has a huge variety of activities. Already there has been an ammonia terminal for years and years, methanol terminals have been there, etc. So safety has always been a very key element. And we also have a local regional authority that actually determines what requirements companies need to live up to when it comes to safety. So we have a special fire brigade, industrial fire brigade. We have, of course, our emergency response protocols. And then when it comes to bunkering, we look at each and every fuel. We do the studies. So for example, for the ammonia bunkering pilot, we did gas dispersion studies. We looked at credible leak scenarios, really. So what would happen in a worst case scenario? What would then the safety contours look like? How do we divide them? And what, for example, PPE, which is the last resort, but you will still use it. So personal protective equipment do people need to use? So yes, that is a very, that's not very easy to answer in, but those are elements that tie into that. And it's a big topic, but there is also a lot of expertise, experience, and yeah, a big organization behind that. Biofuel. Then I see that Professor Michael Fan asks about the quantities available for bunkering in Rotterdam in terms of methane, green methanol, and bioblends. So the quantities, our bunkering numbers are public, so you can access them and you can actually see the numbers. We bunker approximately 10 million tons per annum. We is the whole ecosystem. I believe that biomethane was 17,000 cubes last year, which is, I would have to look on all the other numbers, but you could say the bioblends are actually the largest share of what we see in sustainable bunkering so far. And then methane and methanol are slowly growing. I mean, the methane, biomethane adoption was 5 times as much last year as it was compared to the year before. So we see that there is an upward trend. The available quantities are, I would say, determined by the market. So in theory, you could import as much as you would like. And also, if you can leverage the existing gas grid, and this is where Steve and I have a lot of exchange, then you could leverage biomethane from all of Europe, because Europe recognizes the whole gas grid as one system. yeah, but it's approximately 7% of that 10 million tons that have a bio blend in it. Well, I think that Steve, I could keep on talking to this question, but maybe someone else wants to say something now.
Thanks, Naomi. And maybe what we could do is open the discussion out a bit and go back to some of the initial questions. And there's one of the elephants in the room, along with what's going on, particularly at this point in time around the Straits of Hormuz. But this is around, there's a question here, I think, around the IMO net zero framework, and it's phrased from Marcus Muntz is, what will happen to the fuel debate when the IMO net zero framework dies? Who will then ensure the ramp up of alternative fuels? So I think there's an implication there that the net zero framework will not be formally adopted, but I'm sure we will learn much more in a month or so's time at MEPC 84. And I believe also alternatives or modifications to the current net zero framework are potentially going to be proposed. But yeah, so we've seen how the EU decarbonisation regulation has driven the changes in bunkering of alternative fuels. And as Naomi handily came up with some statistics on biomethane and biomethanol. But what's the view of the panel on developments in the net zero framework and the implications of it going forward, or the implications of it not going forward? Indeed going forward in some modified form? Maybe I start with Aisha. What are your thoughts on net zero framework developments? Big topic.
Yes, it's a quite highly uncertain topic, but definitely we need some international regulations to drive the decarbonization. And if it postpones again, I think it will slow down, unfortunately, the decarbonization. And I know that Zero Carbon Shipping Center has done this survey on the implications, and you can read the newsletter. And many different shipping operators, or maybe also like fuel producer, they participated, and we can, I think the center quantitatively, or at least try to quantitatively estimate the implications, and we can see that most of the investments in the green fuels from let's say from the shipping operators and from all the players has been postponed, so it has some consequences. But on the other hand, we need something internationally controlled regulatory frameworks in order to stay competitive and to accelerate this energy transition. But we also know that geopolitical situation can also play a significant role. So, but what I also think that the Paris Agreement also didn't happen in one day. So it's something that we should push on this, and it's something that if maritime wants to decarbonize, we need some mandatory regulatory frameworks. Otherwise, we will have only EU maritime ETS within Europe, and maybe some other regions can also introduce own tax system, but then it will be very homogeneous, and I think it will be a bit chaotic. So we need something like homogeneous solution for the mandatory regulatory frameworks. Yeah. Alternatively, there will be voluntary system carbon solutions, but being very practical and realistic, it will not drive probably in that speed as mandatory regulatory frameworks.
Thanks, Aisha. Daijin, what are your views on this topic? Mute.
Try not to interrupt. That actually a very good initiative by EU, like EU ETS and pure EU is actually massive. How can I say? As a charterers, when you do kind of procure fertilizer or maybe shipping some cargo, actually charterer pay the freight and EU ETS. So that's important, not owners. Owners eventually pay it, but they actually reimbursed by charterers who is cargo owners. So, and then because 100% are now imposed in EU ETS this year, now you seeing the pain of EU ETS. So now you are slightly looking at pure efficient vessel because it's painful, right?
Mm.
And then basically you say one carbon, let's say it was, I think 2 months ago, pure, as you know, how to say, EU ETS cost was very high, almost $100, but now it's slightly down a lot. But when it become $100, then 1 ton of bunker pure means $300 you need to pay it. So basically, simply speaking, 30-40% more you need to pay it. So somehow everything cascading into your freight cost, and then if you're a trader, that cost is basically your margin, right? So and then that is giving kind of good indication that if regulation is giving some good visibility, you have some interest in those developing those kind of or finding better solution of freight or shipping, right? So on the other hand, if you're not really related to let's say Europe, like a Cape-sized vessel or VLCC, they don't care at all. So if you are, let's say, for example, if I set up some webinar or maybe event in the group that, I will explain maritime regulation, then all the people linking to European area joining, all the other guys are even not clicked anything. Even they didn't see the recording at all. And even somebody expert coming to our office, nobody attending. Only someone who are interested in that one, right? So that's why we need two major impact: interest and motivation. But at this point, only European-related kind of shipping sector have interest and motivation, which is why we are seeing a lot of initiative in Rotterdam, which is a major container port. But if you look into, let's say, some another port, which is just handling Berg carrier, they don't care. Basically, I'm sorry to say that, but that is a reality. And then when you look into even, let's say, another sector like even I even speaking to many green steel. And they have a heavy initiative in Middle East actually, because they are selling a lot of steel cargo to Europe, right? But if you're selling to China, nothing talk about it. So that's why when you look into event where the green related event happening, it's more or less how to say Western hemisphere or maybe European area. So we do not see massive kind of initiative in the Southeast Asia or maybe India. So that's why I think something important for regulation framework, it was a very good chance that IMO set up the regulation that which is similar to EU ETS. That will be very good to understand and easy to pay it. But unfortunately, we are seeing delayed. But that's why we need some kind of visibility and then also some kind of reliability, so that we have a scalable of a project. Otherwise, not many people want to investing in those kind of section.
So really, people react when they receive the compliance bills.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's it is interesting. It's also interesting. Yeah, maybe we can come to the and Aisha mentioned it, the role of the sort of voluntary markets later. But Naomi, from the port side, what would be your reflection on this?
Yeah, so no, I think it's I completely concur with most that was said. I mean, it would have been great to have a global framework. Shipping is the most international sector, I would say. So to have something that's globally harmonized would be super beneficial. I do think that the potentially if it doesn't go through this year, then we will pay the price, all of us. Well, maybe not the port necessarily, but a lot of local or regional frameworks will start to pop up. Like Aisha said, you will get heterogeneous sort of area where and I mean there's there's money to be earned, right? If you can put a carbon levy in place. So there is actually a lot of interest in doing this. And I believe what I heard is that 20 African countries have already said that they are considering their own regional framework. So I think that's it doesn't stop somehow the push for sustainable fuels and decarbonization. At least that's my hope. And also, what I would challenge slightly that nothing's happening in Southeast Asia. As mentioned, I work a lot with Singapore, and Singapore is definitely preparing to facilitate all of the obviously, but I mean, and then I don't know if that, but China actually mentioned a few weeks ago, like Shanghai mentioned that they aim to have 1 million tons of green methanol bunkered in Shanghai by, I think, 2030. And of course, that is heavily related to the commitments of, well, amongst others, Maersk, to green methanol produced in China. So I would say that, and I think I would call it boundary conditions, but somebody corrected me this week and said we should maybe call it facilitating conditions. There are a lot of facilitating conditions are in place. The challenge will be getting it to scale. And for that, yes, the easiest way to do this would be the net zero framework or a variety on the net zero framework for maritime. But not all is lost if that doesn't go through this year.
Thanks, Naomi. So a little bit of hope in terms of other softer signals.
Yeah, and actually in India, I mean, I believe there were some questions maybe also from Indian stakeholders, but in India there is a lot of momentum for the production of e-fuels, right? And actually there are production projects for ammonia that have taken FID. So I think there are also a lot of, and maybe from the security perspective, Jin, as you said, are seeing opportunity in these new emerging markets, but it is difficult to address all the risks and make a business case still.
Yeah, certainly. And there is a question there from exactly around that topic around green methanol production in India for a European customer. But it may be a little bit technical. I don't know if anyone wants to pick up on that. You have this whole issue of methanol requiring both green hydrogen and biogenic CO2 generally. But is there an interim phase within the RFMBO regulations that allows for the CO2 to be taken from an industrial source? I don't know if anyone can can shed any light on that question. Okay. Right.
I can maybe comment on that we have like quite a, especially within Europe, like if in order to comply with FuelEU Maritime, your RFNBO should be produced from biogenic CO2, and it should be produced from not only the hydrogen from electrolysis, but the electricity should be renewable. And that's quite strict rules. And then also you have to meet this GHG reduction of, I think, 70%. So you have to comply all those rules. And that's also makes a little bit of increase the cost of the production because CO2 transportation, maybe it's not like depending on the business case, the project location, your point source can be far away. And my personal opinion that we also have like this book and claim system, but it has been used or it's used for the final product. So it's like between like on the end products. But I think as a transition, that's my also like grand idea that I think probably if we had this book and claim system on the upstream part on the production of fuel, where you basically, and I think in US they use this system. I'm not so sure, but like for example, you can basically book and claim, and you use like CO2 source available from industrial source, but it shouldn't be necessary biogenic one, but then you can claim. So I think it's it makes a lot of sense, because then you will save, you don't, the cost associated with transportation, maybe it's like decreased, but then we still need some traceability, right, to make sure that you actually claim the right biogenic CO2 source. And I think it's, it complicates, and we need more like regulatory systems and the certification systems to ensure that we are claiming the right biogenic CO2. But that's something that probably in the future it may happen, and I think it could be also like quite interesting solution to at least in order to scale the process, having this book and claim on the upstream production of the fuel, which is not like implemented right now.
Yeah, and that sort of suggests a topic of more broadly of chains of custody, and how chains of custody can help these new fuels to scale more efficiently and at lower cost. I don't know if anyone would like to touch on that topic. Naomi, I know you probably can say a few words to that.
Yeah, so I think that there's, I would say, two key things when it comes to chains of custody, and I mean roughly three different options, right? Either physical connectivity, so your actual, or physical segregation, sorry, your actual molecule travels through its own supply chain, your green molecule to the receiver, or you use the same infrastructure, but you combine fossil and green flow, so that's called mass balance, or like Aisha said, the book and claim version, where there is no physical connection between A and B, but you have a fully, how do you say it, administrative secondary path, which you also need in all of the other varieties that traces that molecule. I think that there are two key things, and I really believe that we should be very considerate of what chain of custody principles we introduce when, because one is it increases efficiency and efficient use of infrastructure, but secondly, we also really need to make sure that it is still sustainable and we do not get double counting and green molecules being sold twice, etc. So that's why I think if you look at EU regulations, there are some how should I say this? They're careful with how they implement it. So for now, mass balance on the European continent is in many cases allowed, but book and claim is not yet introduced in this perspective. And this is all on the fuel supply side, because we could also apply this on the cargo side, but that's even more difficult, or then I'm even complicating it more, but that's also a part of it, right? So is your green container actually transported on a ship that is burning a different fuel, or do you also buy a certificate in that sense? So yeah, it's really around one, efficiency and good use of infrastructure and molecules, but also secondly, how do we ensure that it's transparent and actually sustainable? And I think that's where we have a lot of good certification bodies, but we've also seen that it hasn't always gone right in the past. So yeah, that requires a lot of work and care, I would say.
Thanks, Naomi. And Dejin, do you have any views on this?
I will just give you a different perspective. Because of that cargo side, we need to hire a lot of consultants to do that. So you know what I mean. So complicated. So that's why I think something I really hope is even student can learn efficiently will be very helpful for us. But at this point, many cargo charterers hiring just someone who knows their well. So maybe we need to contact the Port of Rotterdam. Yeah, that's what I can say.
Okay, thank you. Dejin, there's another question here, which maybe sits in your ballpark. It's a question from Alexios Kavouras, which is, again, thinking about other drivers for the uptake of green fuels. With the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz, is there a significant increase in the demand for bio-blend fuels in the ports. Maybe you don't have the stats, but I guess your reflections on this would be good to hear from. Also, good to hear from Aisha, Naomi on this. So, do you think the geopolitics will incentivize an uptake in biofuels?
I think currently, I think the EU ETS is basically making conventional fuel expensive, so that alternative fuel becoming more viable, right? Commercially viable. But now, because of this issue, 20-30% out of the supply, it means basically conventional fuel becoming expensive. So that's why, and then the more important one is that it's not just for about maritime, it's entire industry, inflation, everything happening. But something important for us to understand, if you have a, let's say, alternative fuel or alternative energy, we can say, like solar or nuclear or maybe wind, you have a more kind of cushion, right? Even though we know conventional fuel is stable and then also quite cheap, but even when this geopolitical issue continues, not like we have seen last 3 to 4 years, that means it's not anymore about commercially viable option. It's now more security, energy security. So like, for example, Korea does not have anything in terms of energy. They need to import. I think the biggest impact of this Hormuz closure is, in fact, Japan, Korea is the biggest impact because they import 80% of energy from that side. Now they becoming a massive blow because they are importing energy from Middle East and they exporting energy intensive product. It's basically what they do, what we are doing now. So at this point, if you do not have those kind of energy security, your industry is broken out, basically. If we don't know, right, whether how long it goes. Like we have seen another war, it could be 3 weeks, maybe it become 4 years now. So something important for us to understand is it's not just about, when you talk about, let's say, sustainable green, it's not really attractive to normal people. But we all want to have protect our earth. We want to protect the lives. We want to be sustainable. Yes, that's true. But we want to eat food first. We want to be survive, right? So that's why many emerging market, especially in Asia, is still looking for coal, which is dirtiest or something we can say. But still, a major power plant is for coal basis, and then many new energy intensive one is also still conventional fuel like LNG, right? So that's why something we need to see that truth or maybe practical view. We are just talking about, let's say, sustainable fuel or green fuel. We all know we need to do it, but there are some priority in many emerging countries. So we need to accept it, and then starting from that, maybe we can have a better solution, or maybe how to say, a common ground solution. Otherwise, as I'm Asian, right, very practical. We don't have any energy, or we don't have any resources in my country. That what they have is just how can I say, brain, and then also knowledge and insight, or that make them to kind of tradable, how can I say, commodity made. But without that, it's something you need to secure cheapest stable energy to continue to survive. Otherwise, very difficult to many of the. That's why I asking Southeast Asia, except Singapore. Singapore is not really developed country. But when I say emerging country like Thailand and Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, they all want to be better economical, how can I say, development, or better urbanization, or better life, and that need cheap, good energy source, not expensive source. But when it comes to the technology and many things, I think energy security coming to the picture, maybe that could be different. And then what we learned from another sector, we see a lot of how can I say, data center is located in Southeast Asia, where they're using actually sustainable energy, like how can I say, hydro energy, etc. But something important for us is to, when let's say, for example, when that country using that sustainable energy into data center, they need to make up the loss of that energy by conventional fuel, like coal. So it's energy is just number one, right? Energy is used somewhere. You need to make up the loss. So somehow it's something very important for us to understand is you cannot, say, outsourcing energy from emerging country, right? That's something you cannot do that. But anyway, that's happening now. So that's why we are seeing that maritime energy source we are seeing more LNG basis source, because we know LNG supply will be abundant in the next 5 years. That's why we know LNG price may be viable, commercially viable. So that's why many ship owners, we see the LNG price will be relatively stable, so that's why we can invest it. But anything else, we are still not yet seeing that some future of the, how to say, cost. So, but many kind of consulting companies say, ammonia or methanol or price will decline significantly in next 5 to 10 years. But we are not yet seeing it. That's a problem for us to do that. But anyway, we are seeing a little bit kind of scalable project and seeing the prices indeed coming down, but it's still not yet convincing many ship owners to do that. That, I think, that is a major reason why many new owners now switching to LNG rather than another alternative sources.
Okay. Thanks, Sejin. Aisha or Naomi, do you have anything to add to this, or should we move some other topics that we could also move on to?
Well, maybe very briefly on the initial question whether the current global situation is a hopefully temporary opportunity for biofuels. I think that the availability of biofuels and the demand for biofuels is already sort of pushing that price up quite a bit. So the gap with fossil fuels will remain, even though the fossil fuel price goes up, because of the implementation of FuelEU Maritime, but also Renewable Energy Directive in Europe. At least we see that actually the prices for biofuels have gone up quite a bit already. So I think that you will just see that it's a market where currently there's limited availability, I would say. So hopefully it does make a difference for sustainable uptake. That would be never waste a crisis, I guess, but that would be the positive angle. But yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to be the case.
Thanks.
Maybe one more point adding, like to Naomi's, I agree, because the supply of biofuels, and if we talk about these FAME type of products, we already know that the shipping cannot, after 2030, the sustainable availability of these biofuels, like biodiesel type of products, cannot meet all this shipping decarbonization target. And actually it can be there could be fraud, using a lot of used cooking oils, and then probably it will also affect on the sustainability part in the supply chain, because if you have more demand but there is no supply, then probably we will have different malpractices, which is not probably good, and this is not what we want to achieve.
Absolutely. So we've talked about biofuels. We've talked about fuels derived, or synthetic fuels derived from renewable hydrogen. There are some other solutions that maybe we should be also useful to discuss. So there's nuclear. There's battery electric propulsion. You did mention that, Aisha, early on, and then there's onboard carbon capture. So what's the panel's general views on those solutions? Who shall I start with? Who would like to go first?
I can probably. Yeah, I can start carbon capture. Carbon capture, maybe I can discuss about onboard carbon capture, because there have been a lot of work. My personal view, it's the infrastructure is not there yet. Can you I think it will be getting this faster implementation with onboard carbon capture. I find it quite difficult, and because the solubility of this CO2 in this amine-based or ionic liquid-based liquid is also quite a big question. And this also moving around this CO2, for me it's a bit I also see it with some complications in infrastructure. Electrification, I discuss it. I think it's for me, it sounds like a great solution for short distance, for at least for right now. And when it comes to the small modular reactors, we have seen a lot of also like ABS also announce all these like published papers on the small modular reactors. I think this is like interesting solution, but I find it quite difficult to implement in terms of regulatory frameworks, and also different port authorities like can have like different rules, and maybe you can like getting these permissions from ports of different countries, it's like a little bit difficult, and I find it the main bottleneck or the main showstopper is the regulations. And maybe it's a bit more political question, but I would say what I see as a small modular reactors, I see it as a good solution for the on land, where you can basically use it for the e-fuel production and certain like a combination, like for example, high temperature gas modular reactors, where you basically produce also heat, and then you can use this heat for the ammonia production and so on. So combination of these technologies can be very interesting, but it should probably start from the on land implementation rather than using it on board. But I do believe it's like long-term technologies, like for the longer horizon. Like shortly, that's my opinion.
Thanks, Aisha. And Naomi, all these things we're talking about at the moment all have major impacts on ports. So would you like to see a nuclear fuel vessel turning up in the port of Rotterdam? What are you going to do with all the CO2 that's captured on board the vessels? What about the powering all the battery driven vessels?
Yeah. Well, I think. Well, I mean, I again think that Aisha made very good points. So on nuclear, I also think it should first be implemented on land. Also, personal opinion. I also think that developers are actually looking at doing this. For nuclear, what is potentially challenging is that currently nuclear regulations are country by country, right? So it's not for us as a port authority to really say whether that will be accepted, but it's really a national policy decision. And I believe that mainly from a CapEx point of view, it might mostly be a solution that is attractive for big vessels, like large vessels that need high flexibility and have unpredictable trades. So in the Netherlands, we see a big offshore company that is actually developing an SMR themselves because they really believe this is a technology that they could adopt on their vessels. But those are vessels that are huge and are pipe-laying vessels, decommissioning vessels, etc. So I do think that it has a lot of momentum in the maritime sector. I think the easy way for me to say is the Dutch government is actually the party that should say something about this. But we do track it, and we do think we have a role to play in a sense, like what is that interface again with the port, right? And what do you need to do in that interface? So that's where our safety department is involved. Battery electric, agree, short distance. Batteries are very heavy, so they won't work on long distance trades. We see very big potential for battery electric shipping in the inland segment. So we actually have a company, or Zero Emission Services, which provides battery packs, so actually containers with batteries in them that you can then charge on land and then easily swap, so you don't have a long charging time somewhere, but you can actually quite efficiently include this in your supply chain. So there we see applications, and indeed other short sea applications could be there as well. And then onboard carbon capture. I think that there are quite a few challenges to overcome, and if you could switch to a sustainable molecule, of course, then that would be great. But there are applications for it, and the thing is, in Rotterdam, we do have an on-land CO2 pipeline that is currently being commissioned. We have Portos project, which is a storage CO2 storage project, and we are also planning, or parties are planning, a CO2 terminal in Rotterdam. And actually, we already have one party that is doing onboard carbon capture already with an amine solution, also containerized, and they bring that CO2 to the greenhouses. So it is happening already, and Rotterdam has, because of the refineries we have, we are developing onshore carbon capture, so that's what you can then piggyback on. So there are synergies to be found, and in that sense, it is definitely technology that we and supply chains that we look at as a port, and where we put effort in developing them. So I think it's one technology out of many that we as a port have a role to play, and so we do.
Thanks, Naomi. And Daijin, do you have any views on these other solutions?
So I spoke to, I can say, many shipyards in Korea who developed the onboard system, and exactly Naomi just mentioned that the problem is that how to dealing with, how can I say, capture the CO2. And then some beverage company want to buy CO2, they need it, and then some guys want to buy it still, but the volume is not really, how can I say, handleable. So that's why there are some stage of the kind of, how can I say, development, but it looks like quite interesting. But for me, it's more interesting is currently green methanol, green ammonia, all those green is very expensive. But if you becoming purple ammonia or purple hydrogen, it's becoming different story. So that's why when you're using nuclear as framework, as zero emission energy, and you take it as accepted, then you can make a cheaper version of ammonia, cheaper version of, how can I say, hydrogen. So then maybe becoming commercial. But as you know, as just Naomi mentioned, it's not really yet adapted as kind of zero emission stuff. So many regulation is different. So that's why I think something important, we are really studying blue ammonia does not make sense, but if we really can use some kind of nuclear in, let's say, Korea have many nuclear power, or France, or many area, and even US, then you can using that one into the green initiative. Maybe it's becoming a viable, right, option for, how can I say, zero carbon emission kind of pure, but it's still not yet there. And then on the other hand, when you say, how can I say, just to put into the ships, it's as I mentioned, it's too dangerous. It's like more than ammonia, right? Ammonia is still difficult because of this dangerous toxic stuff, but nuclear, how can you, is that vessel can enter in the certain port, do not want to have a nuclear vessel in your shore. So it's very difficult solution in terms of the security issue. But anyway, that maybe different view than using the energy into making green, how can I say, not green, maybe purple, how can I say, sustainable energy. Maybe there could be option maybe in the future.
Yeah, no, I think it's you mentioned the topic very clearly, that around the acceptability of these different solutions to the ports in which would need to provide the infrastructure, or so yes, but we don't have. We're running out of time, so we've had lots of very good questions. So I think in the last couple of minutes, I have one question for the panel before we go, which is, what do you think is the most important topic that we discussed today on the panel? And was there anything that we should have talked about that we didn't? So Aisha, shall I go with you first?
Yes, probably we discuss maybe different types of fuels, maybe also other technologies, including carbon capture, nuclear, and what are the main challenges, port readiness, and so on. And we also touch up a little bit on IMO net zero frameworks and also other regulations. Probably what we probably didn't discuss, or because we didn't have time, probably it's all about how we can enable this transition, what is needed, and how to. Also, we discuss about this gap between fossil fuels and biofuels, if geopolitical situation can affect, and we can close these gaps. Just one thing, I wanted to say that the decarbonization of maritime sector is a huge task for everyone, and we also have some competition from other sectors like aviation, maybe also agriculture, right? Because ammonia is also used for fertilizer, methanol is used as a chemical for plastics. But also what we needed probably to enable this transition is more about regulation is one thing, but also building these partnerships, collaboration. And I think I have beautiful example, what I really like, this Casso plant for the e-methanol production that was first time bunkered on Laura Maersk. We can see that there was not only one off-takers, there were like many off-takers, like including Maersk, Novo Nordisk, Lego. So something that partnerships to share the risk and to share also the revenue. It's something like innovative thinking, not only in the technology development, but also in building these new business cases, something that we needed to decarbonize. And I think it's not time for the, let's say, competition between different ship owners, operators, but actually at the time for the collaboration. And I think something that if we want to decarbonize and enable this scaling up of these green fuels, we need collaborative efforts. That's what was like for me to conclude this. And I think we more or less discussed not everything, but most of the high level topics, in my opinion.
Yes, it's how we do things was an element we could come back to on another webinar. Daejin, your final thoughts on what was the most important thing we talked about and what we missed?
I got one more interesting question, that why energy company does not use land to avoid Strait of Hormuz. They say they're just taking truck and they're going to east of Oman and then exporting it. Why it is? Because the shipping is the most efficient way of transport, and the most most efficient way in the ton per CO2 emission. Shipping is the best way to transport. So I was wondering why it's, let's say, not just about shipping regulation. Let's say global regulation. If you ship by truck for VLCC vessel, like let's say 300,000 tons, or maybe 2 million barrel, right? You can transport by, let's say, truck. You may need 10,000 truck transporting for one VLCC vessel, which means emission can be 10 or 100 times more, right? Just to transport the exact same amount of cargo. So that's why I was wondering why it's not regulated. Let's say if you transport by air, and then if you bring the air transportation to shipping, you may save the world, basically. So that's something I just look into the global, like the perspective. Why? And then when you look into that holistic view, then we indeed reduce the green energy, not just about the maritime sector. So when you look into just shipping, you are not really understand the shipping maritime regulation. You should look at the broader view. And that's why I just mentioned that biofuel is not just for shipping, it's more sustainable aviation, pure, and then many things not, I can say synergy, maybe we can say, rather than just put into one perspective, then we can actually reduce the green energy.
Thank you very much. And I think yeah, and that's it's a very good point. If there's so much siloed thinking in decarbonization generally. So I think Naomi had to drop off. With that, I'll conclude the webinar just to say a word of thanks to the BS Group for organizing this, for the panelists for their great contributions, and to the webinar participants for their fantastic questions. So look forward to seeing you on another occasion. Thank you, and
Thank you.
until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.